you're listening to the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Billy Z.
I'm Brian Pittard.
And I'm Steve Morey.
And we are your hairy, heavy homos that read comic books and have a show dedicated to our opinions about them. And we have a jam-packed episode. First up, we're going to be talking to Joe Carriker. Joe is the writer of an upcoming queer superhero prose novel called Sacred Band. After that, we're going to be talking about the X-Men related series Legion that recently debuted on the FX network. So after the explosion, we'll be back with Joe and get the show going. Okay, and we're going to get going here with our first segment, and in this segment we are going to be interviewing Joe Carriker. Joe is an author about to release his first book, which is titled Sacred Band from Lethe Press. Joe has had a long career as a game designer, and this book, Sacred Band, takes queerness and comic book superheroes and intersects them in a really, really interesting way. Joe, thank you for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, Joe, we tend to be like Loverboy and start from the start whenever we have somebody come onto our show. So
Okay.
Our first question is, and normally we would be doing this about how you got into comic books. We want to stress that this is a prose novel. So we can just talk about writing in general. How did you get into this medium?
Well, I mean, I started doing tabletop role-playing game design work, and I've done that for since about 2000 or so. So I'm closer to 20 years than 10 now. Good God. And part of the work for that, game writing is sort of definitely its own thing, but there are frequently instances that call on you to do some fiction writing to, start off a chapter or, put together an anthology for a game line or something like that. And so, I tried it a couple times and kind of felt like maybe this was another fun medium to tell some stories to people who weren't actually seated directly at my own table.
And with this book, Sacred Band, I'm just going to tie it back to role-playing. I think an integral part of that medium is world building. And did you basically flex the same muscles? Because this instantly felt like a recognizable world.
Awesome. Thanks for saying that, actually.
Yeah.
So I have a sort of a running joke with my partners, and that is that I unfortunately I write novels like a game designer. So I had multiple thousands of words about the world before I had even ever figured out, so what's this plot about? Like, who are my main characters, kind of a thing, which is a little bit backwards way of approaching novel writing from what I understand. But, so I sort of played to my strengths and ran with that. But yeah.
So in terms of influences in regards to the superhero element, what did you pull from to put together Sacred Band?
I've always had like a soft spot for outsiders type superheroes. I'm of course I've been reading X-Men since I was probably 12, and that sort of thing. I always used to love Batman and the Outsiders and these sorts of things. And I've for instance, Chris Claremont is basically is I would probably fall over dead if I had the opportunity to meet him. His work is really fantastic and kind of captures a lot of the same sort of themes that I feel that comic books do a really good job of telling.
Okay, now I've read the book, and I'm going to step away because I already know about the Echo events and the storyline. But if you were in an elevator pitch, how would you describe Sacred Band to somebody to reel them in there?
Sure. So Sacred Band is a novel about a team of LGBT superheroes in a post-superheroic world. Basically, it's gotten to the point where while there was an era of sort of what we think of as superheroes, that era is kind of past in the setting of Sacred Band. And, the assumption is if you want to fight crime with your superpowers, you join a law enforcement division. If you want to defend your country, you join the military. So there are established places for supers in this setting. But the fact is that official law enforcement, official justice concerns, unfortunately fall short when marginalized populations are affected sometimes. And so this is a team of supers who, frankly, commit a crime in putting together a team in order to help those marginalized peoples that nobody else is going out of their way to help.
Okay, and one other thing that I was struck with within the book is I think going into it, I see a lot of analogs, the Sentinel, I would say, right off the bat. From his first descriptions, appears to be the Superman analog, the Boy Scout.
Definitely.
But as you get into it, there's so many more levels to these characters. I'm just wondering this because, I've written some stuff myself. Did they start writing themselves at points? Rusty
To
and
an
some of those characters?
extent,
Yeah.
yeah, to an extent. I mean, a lot of the places where they begin to kind of pull away from their sort of foundational archetypes are definitely those places where the character clearly had their own kind of ideas, and that sort of thing. I'm definitely not one of these authors who is sort of the, my characters ran away from me kind of camp.
Mm-hmm.
I just not how I operate. But yeah, definitely, it was really fun to see certain elements of personalities and particularly interactions, right? Like, I had planned parts of their personalities as being self-contained, but the really interesting stuff started happening when those elements began interacting with similar elements in other characters, and those sort of intersections started to get, a lot of fun.
Another thing I really appreciated about the book was that, just for people listening, this is a global story. And, with the two principal characters being one from the United States, another one from the Ukraine, even on your website, you have a pretty detailed map in relation to where some of the events took place. What I was really struck about that was sometimes when you read, especially prose novels, that are adventure based, is there's a basic description of the geography, and then the action could basically take place anywhere. It kind of gets lost as plot gets moving. And I didn't feel that here. Are you well traveled, or was this heavily researched, or how did you go about in terms of literally mapping the story
Well,
out?
for some of these places, I definitely did have to go out and do a lot of research, and it was a lot less. It was a lot less book research and a lot more. One of the tremendous benefits, sort of the era that we live in, for authors, is the fact that it's very easy to meet and make friends with people from a huge variety of places. And so just through my own sort of social media interactions, I had the opportunity to talk with a lot of people who live in some of these places and that sort of thing. But yes, like I myself, there's a bit that's set in very sort of northern Mexico, along the Rio Grande, and I grew up in South Texas myself, so I drew a lot on that. And then I, of course, live in Portland, and one of the sort of big scenes happens in Portland as well. So it was a lot of both of those elements. Yeah.
Okay, when we do our interviews, we tend to picture it like a relay race. So I'm going to hand over the interview baton to Steve. Steve, what do you
Okay.
have for Joe there?
Yeah, I'm not a racer, so hopefully you're not picturing me jogging along trying to grab the baton.
That's why you're in the second heat, dude.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like good for a quick burst of speed, and then I'm gonna be tossing the baton over to Bryan. But anyway, yeah, so obviously there's a lot of kind of leading off of what Bill had just mentioned, a lot of geographic difference, that you're highlighting in the novel. But you being from South Texas and also, living in Portland, there's a lot of that feel, especially early in the book, of life in Portland, life in the Northwest, that I really love. Maybe just because I'm a fan of Portlandia. But I could just really, I could definitely just really picture the familiarity that you have as an author with the setting, and you could have fooled me that you haven't been to the Ukraine either, which is very interesting. But yeah, I mean, is that? Do you think you can draw a lot of influence from where you live now, and sort of not just your writing style, but also the type of topics that you've drawn into this novel?
Oh, without question. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like, when it comes to the setting in particular, I'm a very firm believer that the sort of invisible background, but still important character in any given scene is where it takes place. And just as with any other character, if you sort of ignore them, then like, why is that character even there? Right. So I'm a very firm believer in figuring out what the sort of terrain looks like, what's going on around them. And to be perfectly honest, like that's not a skill that comes naturally to me, but is something that's come out of, years of running role-playing games and engaging with visual, because I'm not an artistic person. Like I'm not an artist, but engaging with the sort of media that does depend a lot on that visual element has really helped me to like begin to picture how these things are coming together, and even camera shots and things like that. So yeah, absolutely.
I did get that feel, that kind of almost cinematic feel in certain parts. I'm like, I could definitely see this actually running as a Netflix series. That's a future. That's a future.
God's ears.
That's a future possibility there. But and actually, that's very similar to what I was thinking as well, because of your experience in basically writing these scenarios for different RPGs. That definitely is extremely important. Making sure that the players, or in this case the readers, understand where they are in order to put themselves into the situation.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, and it's not just, the what is there, but also the way that a character interacts with their environment will say something about that character, right? We often think of sort of character development as those times when characters interact with one another. Well, again, like using the setting, using the physical terrain of the scene as another character. So I have a checklist. I have a checklist of things that I go back through a chapter when I've written it, and on that checklist is how do characters interact with the setting. Because I firmly believe that you can say something about a character through those sorts of interactions, right? And otherwise it feels like a wasted opportunity to some extent.
And actually I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, because I did have the question and I'm not sure where to work it in. But obviously one of the main themes of the novel is, a very strong LGBTQ, I'd say an importance of LGBTQ and other marginalized people, as putting them front and center, as still is, in many parts of the world, but also in light of recent political developments in the United States, potentially, here in the U.S. as well, as not necessarily attacked, at least in this case, but, oppressed or made invisible.
Yeah, definitely.
Purposefully. And, do you have actually a history in either local or community activism that sort of informs a lot of your knowledge and a lot of your viewpoints in this kind of situation?
I do. In my early 20s, I spent some time sort of doing local kind of activism in Texas, and that sort of informed a lot of my kind of views about where we sort of fit into an overall where our place is in the sort of overculture of our country to some extent. And like I'm not quite as physically active in terms of getting out and that sort of thing, but I am one of the I do proudly consider myself one of the dreaded SJWs and all the rest of that, because frankly I suppose at heart I'm an idealist, and I want everyone to have good living experiences, and I don't think it's too much to ask for a species that is capable of the incredible feats that we are to say, let's figure out a way to make the world literally better for everyone. I don't think that's too great of a challenge. And so, so that's always been a big part of that. And like, it definitely informed part of my writing for Sacred Band, particularly areas where, I frequently in gaming we often hear, oh, I don't want politics at my gaming table, right? And the fact is that, like, if you occupy a position where the difficulty that other people's lives, identities bring them is just quote unquote politics, like, that's not a real view for me. That's something from behind a definitive wall of privilege that not everybody, has the luxury of experiencing. And so for me, activism is also people's actual lives, right? Like, these are the travails, these are the troubles that people actually go through. And there's no separating them from me. And so that's also sort of informed that, like, yes, there are political elements, but it's also about, in the mode of what are people going through, that definitely has shaped the narrative in Sacred Band.
Well, and of course, you're mixing that not just LGBT type characters, but you're also mixing them with superpowers. So it's kind of a very interesting dynamic. So marginalized people with people who have power that's greater than those around them.
And it's fun because, to some extent, within the setting, obviously, it's easy for folk with superpowers, particularly in an era where they're not superheroes anymore, to be their own form of marginalized community, while at the same time also having a very distinct form of privilege in the fact that they do possess these powers, right? And so being able to play with a population that basically is marginalized but also has a distinct privilege, I think is a great dynamic for good stories.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to pass this along to Bryan, because I think that's a good time for me to switch off and see what questions he has for you. But thank you.
So I've totally been stalking you while we've been talking. I mean, that's kind of how this works, right? One random question now that I know you have an activist background. Are you involved with the sisters at all?
So I myself am not, although I run every Friday. I run a D&D group, well, like a gaming group, for a group of fellow bears. We refer to it as our Dungeon Bears group, and two of our members are members of the sisters. So yeah, it's colloquially referred to as our Dungeon Bears and Drag Queens group.
Oh my god, that is so cool. Like, in Orlando, I'm in the bear community. I think we're all in our respective bear communities here, but I would love it if there was an active, like, geeky D&D scene, because I know so many sisters and drag queens too who are into gaming. It's like, this would be perfect. I'm gonna have to borrow that idea.
It's funny because it's a group that I started when I moved back to Portland in 2012 from I was working in Atlanta, Georgia for about 5 years. And when I moved back, one of my friends because I'd lived in Portland before I moved to Atlanta, so I moved back home basically, sort of approached me and was like, I know you haven't started any groups. Would you be okay with somebody who's totally new? And he's queer. In fact, he's one of the sisters that we're talking about. And I got to talking to some other folks, and so there's this odd dynamic, and I've brought this up in panels before. There's this odd dynamic where there's an element of role playing that is actually very vulnerable, right? Like being at a table, sharing creative space with other people is kind of an act of vulnerability, for all the fact that you make jokes during it and that sort of thing. And it's the reason why, role playing can be difficult for some people. Well, I found that a lot of queer folk, when they were at the age where a lot of people first get involved in role playing, a lot of them were still in the closet at that time. And that kind of, like, shared vulnerability was sort of frightening. Like, that was a definite, like, something that caused them to keep gaming at arm's length. And so as a result, I found that there's a whole mess of queer folk who would love to game, but have just, never had the opportunity, don't really know how to broach the topic of being included and that sort of thing. And so at the panels, I've helped organize a set of panels that started at Gen Con called Queers, a Three-Sided Die. And one of the things that we did there was sort of encourage people to not just, enjoy their gaming and include queerness in their gaming, but to include their fellow queers in gaming, to go out. We all know folks who, they're thoroughly geeky, right? They may be Marvel Cinematic Universe fans or what have you. A lot of times those folks who would love to try gaming but have just never had the opportunity or the kind of way in. So I always tell people, round up a group of your geekiest queer friends and ask if they want to learn to play D&D. You will be surprised how many jump on it.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, you're exactly right. There's an element of performance and there's an element of creativity that the Sisters, at least as an organization, certainly foster with their process, and other groups touch on. But it makes sense. It's totally. I can see how that would work. So another question for you, and Steve kind of touched on it, but I'll sort of let you give maybe more detail if you want. Your path to the community, not coming out as much as finding your tribe, and also for me, and maybe you as well, although I think yours is probably due to your activist background, finding the gender identity, trans issues, finding all the sort of other communities that sort of sometimes are very adjacent to our own as gay men or bears or whatever.
Yeah.
How did you fall into all that? Was it through your advocacy work, or was it through just other circumstances that got you more exposed to that and more sympathetic and more engaged with that community?
Yeah, interestingly, it's actually primarily because of my background in gaming. That I know as diverse sort of a population as I do. A lot of the activist work that I did was kind of, front lines protesting in front of the Capitol building in Austin and stuff like that. So a lot of that tended to be a sort of, sort of a visual aspect, right? Like a certain folk turned out for that kind of thing, and it was because it was dangerous. It could be dangerous sometimes. So, but no, the broad range of folk that I know is mostly because of gaming, which was one of the reasons I'm, very grateful to my gaming background and suggest it to everyone I can. But yeah, I mean. Yeah, I don't know if I answered the question.
No, you totally did. Is there any specific getting into gaming? Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you fell into that. I mean, obviously you've probably played tabletops for a long time, but how did you decide? I want to actually do this in more of an active role. How did that come about?
Well, so I've been playing for 30 years. Since I was 12. My mother brought home the sort of the old red box for basic D&D, and I was pretty much hooked. But of course, nobody that I knew had even ever heard of role-playing games. So if there was anybody who was going to run it, it was going to have to be me. So I've been kind of running and organizing games and that sort of thing since I put it together because, well, I wanted to play, and this was how it was going to work. And then, once I hit adulthood and actually moved out to Portland in my mid to late 20s, I ended up meeting some folks who worked in the industry, mostly as a fan. But got to talking with a number of them and sort of share some of my story ideas, and they're the ones who encouraged me to sort of get in touch with some of the gaming companies and see about doing freelance writing, and so I first did that in about 2000, and have been doing so ever since.
Now I have one more totally random, kind of not congruent with anything else question.
Okay.
As you are writing, or after you have written and you're thinking back, what are if you had somebody come to you and say, I want to adapt your comic, I'm an editor at Marvel, tell me who you would want artistically to bring your stuff to life, what kind of visual style, what are you thinking, who are you imagining doing this, or have you even thought about that?
Oh, I haven't actually. I've gotten some again, mostly people I know from the RPG industry. You will notice a recurring theme in my stories. Um,
Also, some amazing artists.
yeah, well, yeah, exactly. And so I've gotten the opportunity to meet a whole bunch of these artists. Like I have some images of the characters in Sacred Band,
Oh, nice.
of the entire team. Yeah, at this point, that were done for me by Melissa Uran, who is an artist that is well known for her work in Exalted, and she has this very beautiful, like very detailed, dynamic art style. But yeah, by and large, I've learned over the years that like when it comes to particularly professional expressions of art, I will engage with an artist in the best way that I should, which is to say as a writer, and I would usually let other people make those sorts of decisions. I've been very lucky to work with some of the best like art directors and these sorts of folk in the gaming industry, and so I have definitely learned to appreciate that talent. So no, I unfortunately have not thought a lot along those lines, although I'm sure I won't be able to stop now. So
Nice. Well, hopefully you come up with something good. And like I think I can't say any off the top of my head, but there have certainly been crossover from comics to gaming and gaming back to comics, both in writing and in art.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I think that'd be fairly interesting if you were able to bring one of your favorite artists over to that side of the house, so to speak. But cool. Those are great. That's all I have. Bill, back to you.
Okay. Well, Brian sort of kind of took one of my closing questions. Let me just adapt it a little bit. I was also wondering why you decided to go with prose instead of possibly pursuing this as a sequential art project in the first place. Because I have to say, in reading this book, you are excellent at, for lack of a better word, combat scenes. It's hard. I hate just calling them fight scenes.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I know what you mean though.
right. And I was just wondering what was behind the decision to do prose, because you don't see a lot of prose superhero books.
Yeah, it's definitely a much smaller genre. Like there's a handful of them out there. Um, and it gets even narrower when you start talking about like, any that express sort of queer elements. But I mostly decided to do this as prose because it was kind of so the way I got started with this was as sort of a lark. And actually, the idea for Sacred Band came up on a Facebook thread where a number of years ago, when Marvel was about to release a new X-Men title that was made up of solely of women. That, of course, topic came across my Facebook and, very interested in. But somebody at some point mentioned that, like, well, I can totally see a superhero team made up only of women, but like it doesn't make sense for other like marginalized groups. Like I can't see a team made up of only of like gay people. And I was like, okay, well, one, you clearly don't know any gay people. Because there's a lot of that like finding your tribe and sticking to your tribe that is sort of comes out of growing up queer in the culture that we have. And that, of course, got me started thinking like, well, why would a queer supers team sort of develop? And then I was off and running. I decided to go with prose because that would be the medium that I had the most control over. And by that I mean like in terms of getting the hard work done, I wouldn't have to be leaning on somebody else, on an artist, for example, because I had no idea whether this was going to go anywhere. It was sort of, I started writing it as a kind of a thought experiment, and a story sort of developed, a setting developed that I wanted to play with, but I had no guarantees that I was going to be able to, for example, pay an artist for their time. And I'm, having worked in the industry as long as I have, I'm very leery about asking people to do creative work for free. Like I'll do my own for my own efforts, obviously. But I'm very leery about doing that sort of thing. So yeah, it just kind of started off as prose because prose was the sort of form that I knew I could produce. over an extended period of creation. But yeah.
Okay. And one thing that you provide in this book, which I don't think we see enough of in queer literature of any type, is a generational aspect. And there's such a sweetness between Sentinel and Rusty and their relationship. Would you agree that that's an element it's in some ways it's unexplored terrain in a lot of ways? And I was just wondering what was behind that.
Yeah, well, so I will absolutely admit that a lot of that is from personal experience. I am 12 years older than one of my partners, and he and I have been together for well over a decade at this point, and sort of like seeing the kind of, because I grew up, I'm 42, so when I was going to high school in South Texas, and there was definitely a very definite notion of what being gay was and what homosexuality was, and and there was a lot of the sort of travails that came of being closeted and all the rest of that. And my partner's experience was very different. He grew up 12 years later in the Pacific Northwest, and like it wasn't a problem for kids at his school who could be out, right? And that just sort of started the initial, like, these are very different generational experiences, and it was kind of an interesting element to me.
Okay, well, Joseph, thank you for spending some time with us. I believe the book is going to be coming out in April, is that correct?
In early April, yep. Sacred Band will be available on Amazon and most bookstores, hopefully.
Okay, and if people want to reach out to you on the interwebs, where would they go?
So I have a Twitter account that is at Oakthorne, OAKTHORNE. And my Facebook is under my name, Joseph D. Carriker Jr. Is out there as well. We also have a Facebook page for Sacred Band, and I can also be found on Goodreads under my name, and Sacred Band has a page there as well.
Okay, great. We will certainly link to those resources. Joe, thank you so much for spending some time with us, and best of luck to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Great, and
thank you so much.
Best of luck to you with Sacred Band.
Thanks,
Thank
Joe.
you so much, Joe.
Okay, we are moving on to Legion, the series that recently debuted on FX based on the Marvel comic of the same name. Or actually, a couple of Marvel comics, right? You can say it was based on New Mutants. You can say it was based on X-Men Legacy. You can say it was based on... Has there ever actually been like a title, Legion?
Yeah, actually.
Recently, right?
Even with DC in the mix?
Well,
no, it was.
I just thought there may have been one title that was verboten, but
no.
Yeah,
no, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Recently.
Yeah. It did. It ran. It ran for a couple of years. I want to say it started in 2012 to 2013, maybe early 2014.
Okay.
But yeah, it focused solely on Legion, and the question was always kind of within the title. Is all of this happening, or is it all in his head? And a lot of the storylines kind of played with that dynamic.
Okay, well, that certainly in some aspects carries over to the TV series. Again, this, as I said recently, as in the time that we were recording it last night, premiered on the FX channel. It's the first co-production between Marvel Television and Fox, who has the X-Men license.
That was fascinating.
Yes.
When I saw that Jeff Loeb was an executive producer and then Bryan Singer, I was like, whoa, what the hell?
Jeff Loeb, Bryan Singer, Stan Lee.
Joe
Quesada. Joe Quesada is also one of the executive producers.
All the usual Marvel names. But Stan Lee, as far as we've seen so far, has not yet made an appearance.
And the series stars Dan Stevens as David Haller, who is a mutant diagnosed with schizophrenia. And there is some background, at least in the comic book, about who David Haller actually is. And it'll be interesting to see if they explore those tropes. We'll let you go to Wikipedia to figure that thing out. But let me start with Bryan. Bryan, what did you think of this show? Because it was nothing like I expected.
I love the creator who actually wrote and directed the first episode, Noah Hawley. I've followed his work since he did Fargo, and he's done other things, but the Fargo TV series, I should say. which I love. I mean, the Fargo show, both season 1 and 2, just phenomenal television, unlike anything else on TV. So I had an idea that it wouldn't be just straightforward, and it certainly wasn't. Like, watching it with my partner Pat, when it aired, like, we basically watched it live. I was, from the very beginning, arrested by the kind of cacophonous, jazzy, electronic, sort of weird 60s, 70s era soundtrack. Like, just very all over the place. And that set the stage then for the visuals, which are also blink and you miss it at times. From that weird dude hanging out in the plant to the demon with the yellow eyes who would occasionally pop up in the corner looking all blob / mojo-ish.
Yeah.
And there's a theory about that we'll maybe get to towards a little bit later. But the show is arresting. And the only thing I will say, and I said this to the guys, I think on our chat, and I said this to some other people so far, is as much as I do really like Noah Hawley, and as much as I'm in, like, you know, he could do a whole lot worse and I'd still follow it. Noah Hawley's a good cover, sort of cover band creator. Fargo is very much the extension of the Coen brothers, visually, tonally, script-wise, everything. This, to me, so far, feels like a Wes Anderson film. Visually, tonally, somewhat script-wise, but depending on which era of Wes Anderson's work you want to look at. But I don't know if that's his intent. This might just be his style, and he just happens to have a lot of similarities. But I really want to see the rest of the series. I want to know how far away from that sort of, you know, center shot, sort of zany dialogue. I want to see where he goes with it and really feel like, is this something sort of more its own thing, or is this him really sort of aping another style that is somebody else's already? You know, so I kind of want to know how that plays out. But as an X-Men fan, I never have been a big, like, Legion follower. Like, I know who he is. He's always kind of that guy. Mm-hmm. And it's chaotic, but it's also kind of interesting because he's one of the few mutants that has mental illness as his primary driver. And in comics, that's not very common. I mean, you got Moon Knight, and you got that guy from the Legion, no pun intended.
There's a couple. Harley Quinn. There's an element of that, but it's tough to maintain that on an ongoing basis, which I think is one of the failures of Moon Knight, because, you know, I mean, how many goddamn Moon Knight series have we had? And I just think there's a sense of repulsion that eventually wanes, because I think that's a difficult element to keep interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and certainly in this show, I think one of the reasons Noah Hawley took this project on, which surprised everybody when it was announced, because he's just come off, I think he was in the middle of season 2 of this remarkably critically acclaimed series, and he's like, yeah, I want to make this X-Men knockoff TV show, and people were like, what? But he said it was the mental illness angle that really interested him, and sort of exploring that, and certainly in just the first episode, the sense of disjoint narrative that someone might have, the sense of what's real, you know, reality itself, you know, sensory overload, you know, there were certainly elements of that. Just so many things kind of in 1 hour and a half, or a little less than an hour and a half. It was exhausting. I mean, I went to bed exhausted from just watching that show, but in a good way. I think in a good way. Like, overall, I'm if my review does not sound positive, it's just because it asked a lot of questions, and I'm very curious for the answers, and still trying to process everything I saw. So
right. I want to throw this over to Steve, because one failing we do have every so often is we will talk about something and not give any sense of plot to what we're talking about for people who haven't seen or sampled what we're talking about. So, Steve, can you provide, it might be very difficult, what the first episode is about, what actually transpired?
Well, I mean, the first episode, again, like you said, the narrative is mostly disjointed. It does, for anybody who's kind of scared off by that idea that there's really no from A to Z happening. There is a central thread that runs through it, where you kind of get a sense of time and place, although that is played with. I think Hawley does a really good job with overlapping the now and the memory, because he plays with that a lot. But ostensibly it introduces you to David Haller, who is clearly mentally disturbed, possibly. And his world consists mostly of this mental hospital that has the most beautiful, and I'll talk about that later, but the setting is amazing. And of course the people that are in his orbit, one of them being Aubrey Plaza, who is kind of like almost a sidekick of some sort, but she kind of does her own thing in a very interesting way. And then of course this beautiful blonde who walks in, who's played by I believe Rachel Keller, who I'm not too familiar with her work. But basically she comes in, he immediately falls in love with her, and it's a very odd relationship between two people who have mental illness and of course have their own quirks that they need to be able to support, as well as have this relationship. And somehow, somewhere in the middle of it, it all goes wrong, and the setting changes, and it's now an interview between David Haller and a interesting character who could be a psychologist, who could be a cop, who could be something completely different, played by Hamish. What's his name?
Linklater.
Hamish Linklater, in a role that I don't think I've seen him in before.
Yeah, he's usually a comedian. Like, he's usually more the zany whatever character, but
and of course the setting is zany, but he's not, and it's kind of an interesting situation where he's interviewing him about what possibly happened in that hospital, in a disaster that we do eventually see, but it becomes, I think, at that point even more surreal. But altogether, the plot is, after you sit through the whole hour, a little bit easier to discern than if you're just taking a 5-minute snippet or kind of like walking in and out. You really do have to sit down and watch the entire thing to kind of understand what's going on. But even then, there's still a lot of questions, and I really do like how they do it without bludgeoning you with this idea that you can't really trust the character whose perspective you're following. David Haller, of course, if he is a schizophrenic character, and there is that question there, is he really mentally ill? Is everything in his head, or is it all happening to him? There's plenty of that going on, so it's very difficult to really, as a viewer, to kind of think, well, is everything that I'm seeing real? Is everything that I'm seeing happening within this world, or is it all happening within his head? And I love that. But yeah, I guess that's a little bit of a synopsis. There's shockingly not a ton happens in the first episode, but enough happens that it sets up quite a bit of mystery in this world that David listed.
Nothing much happens, but you still took a hell of a journey.
Oh gosh, yeah. And
in that nothing much happening.
And I think a lot of how this show is structured, and it's very cinematic. I just to say it's a very cinematic film. The DP should be given all the sexual favors that he or she asks for the rest of their lives, just because they put together a beautiful show. The sets are amazing. The production designer just went all out to create this world that gives you, it gives you a question of, well, when is this taking place? Is it taking place in the 60s, in the 70s, in the future? I mean, there's some technology that pops up that's definitely not from the 60s, but the way people are dressing and the color schemes and the design of furniture and buildings, it's beautiful, but also disjointed. You're not really sure when things are happening, or where things are happening. It's a nondescript location. I know, and and everybody else knows it's filmed in British Columbia, just like everything else, but it could be any city. It could be any time, and I think that's where the genius of this show really comes out.
Right. And I think
so-
that also was complemented by the use of some classic rock songs.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Oh, the Who at the beginning.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Against imagery that you might never associate with those particular songs, including Like a Rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, She's a Rainbow by the Stones. That was
Yeah.
my favorite along those lines was when the first time we actually see him sort of kind of, I don't know what you would call it, like a Legion explosion, to Up the Beach by Jane's Addiction in the when he's being interrogated. I thought that was just visually stunning.
Yeah.
It is now one of my favorite
to
table flip scenes.
Right, and just married to what could be the perfect music to set that to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was so impressed. And there's some electronic pieces. I cannot wait to see like full track listings, particularly at the end. And again, the music element does extend even to some of the characters, with Sid effectively being named after the founder of Pink Floyd.
That was great. I
Yeah.
was like, I told Pat, I'm like, oh my God, they made a Pink Floyd reference. When's the last time I've seen a show do that? You know?
And yet it's effortless and natural. It's not gimmicky. It was beautiful to see. Yeah.
Well, but and then the fact that she's named after. I mean, that kind of leads into the fact: is this all in his head? Is this all happening? Is it what's
what
real,
kind of
what's
trip
not?
is this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
and,
mean, the Sid Barrett story, or The Wall, is very autobiographical for Sid Barrett, and The Wall dealt with mental illness and depression as well. So, I think if not, it's at least a thematic thing more than a plot clue. But I mean, there's certainly theories going all over the place that the whole damn thing is in his head. I've even read one theory, and this kind of alludes back to the devil with the yellow eyes, like he's in the Mojoverse, and this is all a giant reality show thing that they're putting him through.
Yeah.
Well, and this kind of show, I need to go back and rewatch that first episode again, because seeing that demon with the yellow eyes with a very distinct face, and I think it's supposed to be him, kind of just horribly physically warped, but thinking of it from a Mojo standpoint, there is one section where the yellow-eyed demon kind of isn't in the corner, but kind of comes out front and center. And I'm wondering if you might be able to see some spindly legs upon multiple viewings.
Well, so the other theory, and I don't know if anyone else had seen this already, and this has more credence with the Legion character and everything, that it's the Shadow King.
There's that.
So, in fact, supposedly Jermaine Clement is in the show and plays a character that has something to do with the astral plane. So, I mean, like, that all sounds like it's lining up that might be more likely the way it's going. But I don't know.
Be.
Who knows? It's so funny because all the previews people have shown for this show have been from that first episode. Like, you didn't see really much after that in the previews. And so during the show, you're like, oh, well, I saw that scene. Yep, I saw that scene. But then the end is like, whoa, where they're going way off the reservation. This is going down some path I didn't think they would actually do.
Well, and what's interesting, and I'll draw a bit of a comparison with Push. Have you seen? I'm sure both of you have seen the film Push. Chris Evans, pre Captain America.
I haven't seen that.
It's Chris Evans, Dakota Fanning.
Oh yes, I'm sorry.
Djimon Hounsou.
A while ago.
Yeah, but it kind of, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but there is a group called Division or Divisions, and that's exactly what's in the film Push, where the Divisions are set up to basically contain and seek out anybody with mutant powers. In the Push realm, and it sounds like that's kind of this organization as well in Legion's show universe. So it's very interesting how they're setting it up, and I'm wondering, because this is an X-Men show, whether they really refer to anybody who's in the exact X-Men universe or not.
Yet, I think you can say that was the least interesting element about it.
Sure.
Yep. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. Bill, what did you think of the show?
It was nothing like I anticipated. I did not see Fargo. I had no familiarity with what's his face,
The actor.
Noah Hawley.
Creator?
Noah Hawley.
Noah
Let me
Hawley.
get to the actor. I had no familiarity with Hawley's work. And from a lot of the promo clips, it seemed like an interesting mutant-based action show, at least from the first trailer. The second was a little bit more cerebral. I was also surprised that you had something that was so daring being, and we're going back to something we mentioned in the first place, this being the first co-production of Fox and Marvel on this property. I just think your natural gut reaction would be that, these are, I don't want to say competing interests, but joint ventures usually play it safe in business. And I was really happy to see something like that. Okay, now going over to Mr. Dan Stevens. I was a Downton addict. I never thought this guy had the range that you saw within this 90 minutes. I thought he was a serviceable pretty boy actor who was fine as Matthew and didn't think much beyond that. I really thought if you saw him again, it would be variations of Matthew. And he brought something really original to it. I think it's easy to play crazy. It's hard to play crazy and charming. And he somehow, in a very short period of time, you got used to him. You got, I think that goes to something I wanted to say about the show, both in his performance and in the show in general, is it's fully formed and it's confident. Even esoteric TV going back to Twin Peaks or, some other examples, there's baby steps and there's a learning curve of how to put ambitious visuals out on a periodic basis, and sometimes they don't always get it right. This show is confident.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you can feel that. It doesn't feel like a pilot, and it was shot as a pilot. I don't know. I was just so impressed by the format of the show that I think it might be easy, and I hope it doesn't fall into this trap of style over substance. It really is style complementing substance.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we see that often enough.
No,
in any medium.
There was a feel of and Bill, you might have seen this, a little bit of The Prisoner, I think, visually and also in the
I
sense
can
that you're not
see
really
that,
sure
but at the
what
same token, The Prisoner wears on you.
Yeah.
Whereas I think this is inviting. You want to become part of his madness in a sense because some of it is so beautiful.
Well, especially the dance sequence.
Oh.
Oh, can we talk about that? Okay, so here's the only thing I will say. There are two things about this show that bothered me. The dance sequence is one. Because to me that is overindulgent storytelling. And I'm not saying that there aren't reasons to put in a dance number. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that it's not. It wasn't even. It was enjoyable in its own way. But here's my problem. Then an hour and a half, that show could have been boiled down a lot tighter. And Noah Hawley is known for liking those sort of moments just to settle and sort of steep you in the scene. And sometimes it's very effective. Other times I think it's self-indulgent. And that was exactly one of the instances where I thought it went too far. The other thing that killed me, and this took me way out of the show, at least the show up till that point, when they were spoilers, by the way, if we haven't already said that, we're going to spoil stuff. The escape from the facility. Okay. Mm-hmm. The cheap effects that one mutant had when he was throwing people around, at certain points it was okay, but at other points it looked like garbage. Like they didn't even try to give the things weight that they were throwing around. It just looked like really simple emotion interpolation, like just almost like a flash effect where you're like, okay, I want this guy to go from here, and I'm motioning, so of course this is good radio, all the way over to this far point and just go. Like it just felt really wrong. And I'm not expecting a show. I mean, I was actually surprised at the scope that they tried to do on a TV budget like that. But I mean, like it just looked awful, and it it made me really just sort of go, oh, you've been doing such amazing stuff up until now. Why did you cheapen it with this?
It's funny. I just thought that sequence was so accelerated that it didn't bother me.
Oh, I mean, it was quick. I mean, it had a frenetic energy. And what was kind of cool, and they did this several times. So they did that Hitchcock long shot that just stays on a rail kind of thing, goes everywhere. Like, I like that technique when it's used. It's always very impressive if you sit there and think about, wow, that's actually good sleight of hand, or wow, that's actually good. Like, you did all that, you set that up, and that's how you played it out. But that shot was obviously composited because of the effects, and I just felt like it was too much.
Okay.
I don't know. That's a stylistic decision. Like, I'm totally cool if everybody disagrees with me. The dance number was just unnecessary.
The dance number was the best part. No,
it served no narrative purpose other than he's still obsessed with this chick. Well, obviously he is. Like, no shit.
I think the setup for the series was great.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there's so many different ways it can go between the people that are pursuing him and the people that he is, at least from the outset, running with. It seems that there's a lot of different types of stories they could tell that may stray somewhat from the main narrative, because it is episodic television. And something that Steve commented on, the look of the show, where you don't know quite when this is taking place. Just think of his sister Amy's, her hairdo.
Well, her dress and her hair. Like,
oh
her
my
dress
God, it was like, okay, are we in the 60s? I think elements of that, though, are going to give this series a timeless feel. And there are some shows that just don't stand the test of time that were praised in their day. And I think in incorporating elements like that may in some ways possibly ensure that it doesn't fall into that trap, which was interesting because I think one of the best examples of that is what you mentioned before, The Prisoner.
Mm-hmm.
You can watch The Prisoner today, and whether you enjoy it or not, it's nothing that will distract you because of the time that it was created.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Although, like I had mentioned before, I do almost feel that the fact that it looks a little bit out of time, that you're mixing a whole bunch of fashions and architecture and color schemes and that it could be part of the narrative. In fact, it might end up being that important. The fact that it doesn't really match any one time or place.
And just one comic book related point I want to get through. The character was co-created by Chris Claremont and Bill Sienkiewicz during the original New Mutants run. Bill Sienkiewicz hasn't really had much of an attachment with this character since its creation. And the character has certainly evolved from the first time we saw David Haller during that, I guess, I want to say like around 84 or so in New Mutants. I think this was the closest I've ever seeing a Sienkiewicz visual. It had that aesthetic. I'm just thinking of some of the more colorful, I'm not talking like Demon Bear and that shit, but I'm talking about like some of the more colorful expressions of Warlock and Elektra Assassin. It had that twisted aesthetic that, I don't know, just seemed to complement something that, on paper at least, was co-created by Sienkiewicz. So.
I was thinking, I think, was it Mike Del Mundo who did the covers for the Legion series a few years ago? I was thinking his artwork stood out more, but like in terms of, comparison. But I mean, I don't know. Like, what scenes are you thinking about had that? You talking about just the overall sort of tone, like does the Clockwork facility, like that part?
Yeah,
or?
I would say with the facility when he first touched her.
Okay.
And you had that kaboom, and then subsequent to the escape and all that weird shit with the closed rooms.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
Yeah, I think there were elements. And then there were elements that were like mod culture, too. The costume design of that facility. And the outfits that those people were in, you half expected the Small Faces to come out and, singing Tin Soldier,
That's true. I hadn't thought about that. I was trying to put a name to that look, because to me that's very Wes Anderson to have these sort of jumpsuit uniforms that they're wearing.
It felt very, for music fans, felt very Blur.
Yeah.
Dan Stevens, how he looks in this series, and Damon Albarn, it's not a huge puddle jump. And I think that's one of the reasons I enjoyed this series is I can't see series, it's one episode, Jesus Christ, but that I enjoyed this episode so much. It was such a mishmash, and mental illness could be viewed that way, of elements that don't quite match together, and in some ways elements that perfectly complement each other, though on paper they shouldn't.
Do you know what sold the mental illness to me, to be quite honest? And it was kind of played as for a joke, but it was still very arresting, is the sister's reaction to him when he comes home. The facial expression of, and then the physicality where she hugs him dearly and really connects with him after being very awkward, and then going back after he breaks the lamp to like that awkward he wants to garden in the morning and takes all the sharp tools with her, there's just, I mean, I don't have mental illness in that prominence in my family, but I've certainly been around families enough that have like that one relative or friend of the family who you're just a little leery of, and it's that same reaction. It's that same, you just don't quite know how to deal with them, and so that really sold that in terms of other people's reaction to him.
And in terms of what we got coming up, I can say Jean Smart is one of those actresses that I have never seen turn in a bad performance.
No, and even though she's really only in this for like a few minutes, really.
Yeah. And like
you need to watch Fargo season 2 if you want to see one of the best Jean Smart performances of forever. It's that. She is an amazing performance in that second series.
Okay, that alone has sold me on it because I didn't know she was in it. So.
Oh, she took this role part unseen because Noah Hawley was doing it, and she got an Emmy nomination, I believe, for her role in Fargo. Like, she just was like, "Yep, no, you do great stuff. I'll do whatever you want."
Yeah. No, I just always found her to be one of those actresses that elevates whatever she's in. Even a formulaic construct like 24. When she was on that, my God, it was a better show just because she was on it. Well, I think we are in agreement that Legion was good, interesting. I don't know whatever other descriptives to apply to it, but I think I am correct in speaking for my co-host that we will be watching every episode.
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh, and just to kind of correct a little bit earlier, the series that Legion headlined himself, was the main character in, is X-Men Legacy Volume 2.
Okay. Oh, okay.
That ran from November in 2012 to sometime in 2014. So that's the one that basically it's his book, and I think I guess it was 24, 25 issues. Something about that. So yeah, X-Men Legacy Volume 2, all Legion all the time.
Okay, well, I do have to say I don't want to see Dan Stevens with that hair, though.
No.
Oh God, I really hope they don't do. They won't, and that is actually one of the interesting things, or one of the best things with Noah Hawley, is that he is probably going to just really bring his own spin to the visuals anyway, or at least do a great cover of Wes Anderson doing an X-Men show.
Okay, well, we're going to move on to our final segment, which is the Woofs of the Week segment, where we spotlight something, be it a comic book, hey, this is a comic book podcast, or a film, TV show, charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener, may enjoy. So I'm going to start with Brother Steven. Steve, what is your Woof of the Week?
Well, it's kind of it's a twofer, but that's only because they're on the same night of the week. And unfortunately, one of them is opposite Legion. So if you feel like setting your DVR or otherwise, the two series that I want to talk about are Sci-Fi Channel's The Expanse and The Magicians, both back for a second season. And I know we talked about them a lot last year. I'm going to talk about them just very briefly right now. If you missed these last year, catch up on them. I think both of these are available now on Netflix and other streaming services like Amazon, etc. It's worth your time to go back and binge watch both of these series for the first seasons. They're 10 episodes apiece, so it's just 20 hours of your time. But I totally recommend you go back, you watch those, and then you get get back into this season, because both shows have come back explosively this year. And they'll be running into the summer. They're 10 episodes apiece. We're up to, I think, the third week as of the time of this recording. So, yeah, both The Expanse and The Magicians, both available on Sci-Fi. They air on Wednesday nights, but you can always stream them anytime, I guess, after they air. So, yeah.
Okay, Brian, what is your Wolf of the Week?
I totally agree with you, Steve. Those two shows are great. I have not caught up on The Magicians, but I am almost caught up on Expanse. I think I'm down one episode. So, another show I highly recommend, since we're in the TV vein. If you have not gone out and checked out Lemony Snicket's series of Unfortunate Events, this is one of my favorite book series of all time. Kids books, but also just in general. And Netflix, they brought the team that was originally supposed to make the movie that was also really good, but they ended up swapping out director and the writer who created the books for a different script screenwriter. They got the team back together, including Daniel Handler, who wrote the books, Barry Sonnenfeld, who directed some amazing stuff over the years, like The Addams Family and Men in Black, and just made a remarkable piece of television. And it's on Netflix, so if you have Netflix, you can binge the whole thing all at once like you want to do. And it's 8 episodes, and so it's fairly quick to binge even. But it's good for young and old. I think I've heard kids as young as like maybe 8 or 9 enjoying it and being able to get out a lot. But it's also really good for adults because there's a lot of subversive sort of literary-minded humor. And music by James Newton Howard, who didn't do the movie, but actually has done a really good job in sort of bringing some of the songs from the books to life. And Neil Patrick Harris, of course, who is an amazing Count Olaf, who's the main villain, and also quite an accomplished musician on his own, who does some great singing. So if you like zany, if you like things like sort of fable-esque things that are larger than life, hyper real, but have a really interesting sort of message of empowerment through diversity and struggle, you definitely owe it to yourself to check out the series of Unfortunate Events.
Okay, for my Wolf of the Week, I'm going to turn to comic books. And the series I'm going to recommend, primarily on the most recent arc that's appeared in the book, is Nightwing, which is written by Tim Seeley with art by Marcus Toe. In this current arc, which is titled Bloodhaven, we see Dick Grayson returning, or for the first time, going, depending upon how you view Nightwing's arc, to the sister city of Gotham, Bloodhaven. In the story, Grayson encounters a group of villains that were essentially run out of Gotham. They're called the Runoffs, and have started new lives, not as villains, in the city of Bloodhaven, but there is somebody who is framing them for crimes that they didn't commit. And as much as I enjoyed Grayson as a series, I'm always heartened and happy to see Dick Grayson as a superhero. And for any of our friends who are so wired, if you want Nightwing ass, you got plenty of it in this series. And as far as I know, the first cover appearance of Nightwing's ass is being spotlighted on issue number 14. And I imagine it's going to be collected sometime around April or May, given DC's current rebirth schedule. I believe it's issues 10 through 14. That's my pick. Nightwing, currently published by DC, written by Tim Seeley, and with art by Marcus Toe. So, we are the Comic Book Bears podcast, and we have another episode here in the can. If you want to reach out to us, you can do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. You can subscribe to us through iTunes. You can reach out to us also through our Facebook page as Comic Book Bears Podcast. And you can find us occasionally, I'm going to use that occasionally because we really need to update these sites, on the Twitter and the Tumblr and Instagram as Comic Book Bears. So until next time, I'm Billy Z.
I'm Brian Pittard.
And I'm Steve Morey.
You're going to hear a woof and an explosion. We'll be back real soon. Take care, everyone.
Woof!